Sarah Chen woke up every morning to the sound of washing machines. The old machines in her family's laundromat made loud noises that shook the walls of their small apartment above the shop. She had lived with these sounds for 16 years, but she never got used to them. Sarah's room was tiny. It had one small window that looked out onto the street. Every day she watched people walk by. Some were going to work. Others were going to school. But the ones that caught her attention were the children carrying music cases. These children walked differently. They held their backs straight and their heads high. Sarah could tell they came from families with money. Their clothes were clean and new. Their shoes were shiny. They carried violins in black cases or had music books under their arms. Sarah pressed her face against the cold window glass and watched them pass. She wondered what it felt like to carry a violin. She wondered what it felt like to make music. Sarah had never touched a musical instrument in her life. Her parents, Mr. and Mrs. Chen, had come to America from China when Sarah was very young. They worked hard every day in the laundromat. Her father fixed the broken machines. Her mother helped customers and counted money. They opened the shop at 6 in the morning and closed it at 9 at night. Sarah helped in the shop after school. She folded clean clothes and sorted them by color. She swept the floors and wiped down the machines. Sometimes she helped customers who didn't speak English well. Sarah could speak 3 languages, English, Mandarin, and a little Spanish. The work was not exciting, but Sarah never complained. She knew her parents needed her help. They were saving every dollar they could. Her father wanted to buy newer washing machines. Her mother wanted to send money to their family back in China. Music lessons cost money. Sarah knew this without asking. She had seen the ads in the newspaper. Piano lessons were $50 per hour. Violin lessons were even more expensive. These were amounts that her family could not spend on something that was not necessary. One day in October, Sarah was walking home from school when she saw something strange. There was a crowd of people around the community center. The building was old and made of red brick. Sarah had passed it many times, but never went inside. She walked closer to see what was happening. People were carrying things out of a big moving truck. There were tables, chairs, and boxes. But then Sarah saw something that made her heart beat. Faster, 2 men were carrying an old piano. It was brown and scratched. Some of the white keys were yellow with age. One of the black keys was missing completely. The piano looked like it had seen many years and many hands. Sarah followed the men as they carried the piano into the community center. She had never been inside this building before. The floor was made of old wood that creaked when people walked on it. The walls were painted yellow, but the paint was peeling in some places. The men put the piano against the far wall near a window. They wiped the sweat from their faces and left. Sarah stood there looking at the piano. Even though it was old and damaged, it was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. "Do you like music?" A voice asked behind her. Sarah turned around. A woman was standing there. She was short and had gray hair. She wore a blue dress and comfortable shoes. Her face was kind, with smile lines around her eyes. "I'm Mrs. Rodriguez." The woman said, "I run this community center." "Are you interested in the piano?" Sarah felt her face get hot. She was shy around adults she didn't know. "I was just looking," she said quietly. Mrs. Rodriguez walked over to the piano. She pressed one of the white keys. It made a soft sound, but Sarah could tell it was not the right sound. "This piano was donated to us," Mrs. Rodriguez explained. "The family that owned it moved away. They couldn't take it with them." "Does it work?" Sarah asked. "Some of the keys work. Others don't. It needs to be tuned." "That means someone needs to fix the sounds it makes." Mrs. Rodriguez pressed a few more keys. "Some made music. Others made no sound at all." Sarah stepped closer. The piano was taller than she was. The keys were smooth but had yellow stains on them. She could see dust inside where the strings were. "Have you ever played piano before?" Mrs. Rodriguez asked. Sarah shook her head. "No, I've never played any instrument. Would you like to try?" Sarah looked around. There were other people in the room setting up tables and chairs. She felt nervous with so many people watching. I don't know how, she said. Mrs. Rodriguez smiled. Nobody knows how when they start. Here, let me show you something simple. She sat down on the bench in front of the piano. The bench was also old and worn. Mrs. Rodriguez placed her hands on the keys. She pressed 3 keys at the same time. Even though the piano was old and out of tune, the sound was beautiful. That's called a chord, Mrs. Rodriguez explained. When you play more than 1 key at the same time, it makes a chord. Sarah watched Mrs. Rodriguez's hands. Her fingers were short, but they moved across the keys like they knew exactly where to go. She played another chord, then another. Even on this broken piano, the music sounded magical. Your turn, Mrs. Rodriguez said, standing up from the bench. Sarah looked around again. Some of the other people had stopped working to listen. She felt scared but also excited. She had dreamed about touching piano keys for so long. Slowly, Sarah sat down on the bench. It was the right height for her. She looked at all the keys. There were so many of them. White ones and black ones in a pattern she didn't understand. Just to press 1 key, Mrs. Rodriguez said softly. Any key you want. Sarah raised her right hand. Her finger touched a white key in the middle of the piano. She pressed it gently. The sound that came out was clear and pure. It was not like the washing machines or the traffic outside. It was not like any sound Sarah had ever heard before. She pressed another key, then another. Each one made a different sound. Some were high and light, others were low and deep. Sarah felt something inside her chest that she had never felt before. It was like happiness, but stronger. Good, Mrs. Rodriguez said. You have a nice touch. That means you press the keys in a good way. Sarah played a few more keys. She tried to make them sound like the chords Mrs. Rodriguez had played, but it didn't work. The sounds didn't go together the right way. It takes practice, Mrs. Rodriguez sighed, reading Sarah's disappointed face. Everything good takes practice. Sarah stood up from the bench. She knew she had to go home. Her parents would be wondering where she was. It was almost time for dinner. Thank you, she said to Mrs. Rodriguez. You can come back any time, Mrs. Rodriguez replied. We're open every day except Sunday. The piano will be here. Sarah walked home slowly. She could still hear the sound of the piano keys in her mind. That night, while she helped fold laundry, she thought about the piano. She thought about Mrs. Rodriguez's kind hands on the keys. She thought about the magic sound that came from pressing just 1 key. For the first time in her life, Sarah had touched music. And music had touched her back. Sarah could not stop thinking about the piano. For 3 days, she walked past the community center on her way home from school. Each time, she slowed down and looked through the windows. She could see the old brown piano sitting against the wall. On the 4th day, Sarah finally got the courage to go inside. Mrs. Rodriguez was there, organizing books on a shelf. She smiled when she saw Sarah. I was hoping you would come back, Mrs. Rodriguez said. The piano has been waiting for you. Sarah felt her face get warm. Is it really okay if I touch it again? Of course, that's what pianos are for. They want to be played. Sarah walked over to the piano. This time she wasn't as nervous. She sat down on the bench and placed her hands on the keys like she had seen Mrs. Rodriguez do. She pressed 1 key, then another. The sounds were still beautiful, even though the piano was old. Can you show me how to make a chord again? Sarah asked. Mrs. Rodriguez sat beside her on the bench. Put your thumb here, she said, pointing to a white key. Put this finger here and this finger here. Sarah tried to copy what Mrs. Rodriguez showed her. At first, her fingers felt clumsy, but then she pressed all 3 keys at the same time. The chord sounded just like the one Mrs. Rodriguez had played. That's perfect, Mrs. Rodriguez said. You learn very fast. Sarah played the chord again. Then she tried putting her fingers on different keys to make different chords. Some sounded good together, others didn't. But Sarah was starting to understand which keys worked well with each other. How do you know which keys to press? Sarah asked. Years of practice, Mrs. Rodriguez said. But you seem to have natural Talent, that means music comes easily to you. Mrs. Rodriguez showed Sarah how to play a simple song using just 3 chords. The song was called Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. Sarah had heard it many times before, but she had never thought about how it was made with music. At first, Sarah's fingers moved slowly. She had to think about each key before she pressed it. But after practicing for 20 minutes, something amazing happened. Her fingers started to remember where to go. She didn't have to think so hard about each note. "That's wonderful," Mrs. Rodriguez said. "Most people take weeks to learn that song. You learned it in 20 minutes. Sarah felt proud and excited. She had never been good at anything special before. She was okay at school, but not the best student. She was helpful in the laundromat, but folding clothes was not difficult. This was different. This felt like something she was meant to do. "Can you teach me another song?" Sarah asked. Mrs. Rodriguez looked at the clock on the wall. "It's getting late. Don't your parents expect you home?" Sarah looked at the clock too. It was almost 6 o'clock. She had been playing piano for 2 hours without realizing it. Time had passed so quickly. "I have to go," Sarah said sadly. "But can I come back tomorrow?" "Yes, but I have an idea. I need help organizing the papers in my office. If you help me with that work, I can teach you more piano." "Would you like that?" Sarah's eyes got wide. "Really? You would teach me?" "I used to be a music teacher," Mrs. Rodriguez explained. "I taught piano for 30 years before I retired. I miss teaching. It would make me happy to teach you." Sarah felt like she might cry from happiness. "Yes, please. I would love that." The next day, Sarah hurried to the community center as soon as school ended. Mrs. Rodriguez was waiting for her with a pile of papers that needed to be sorted and filed. Sarah worked quickly and carefully. She wanted to finish the work so they could have more time for piano. When the filing was done, Mrs. Rodriguez sat with Sarah at the piano. "Today I want to teach you about scales," she said. "A scale is like the alphabet for music." Mrs. Rodriguez showed Sarah how to play 8 keys in order. The sounds went from low to high like steps going up a staircase. "This is called a C major scale," she explained. "It uses only the white keys." Sarah practiced the scale with her right hand, then her left hand, then both hands together. It was harder than playing chords, but Sarah was determined to learn it. After a week of coming to the community center every day, Sarah could play scales smoothly. She could also play 3 simple songs: "Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star," "Mary Had a Little Lamb," and "Happy Birthday." But something else was happening too. Sarah was starting to hear music in her head. When she walked home from the community center, she would think about the piano keys. She would imagine pressing them and hear the sounds they would make. One day, Sarah sat at the piano and tried to play a song she had never learned. She had heard it on the radio in the laundromat. It was a popular song that many people knew. Sarah tried to find the right keys to make the melody. At first, it didn't sound right, but Sarah kept trying. She pressed different keys until she found ones that sounded like the song she remembered. Slowly, note by note, she figured out how to play the whole song. Mrs. Rodriguez had been watching from across the room. She walked over to the piano with a surprised look on her face. "Sarah, how did you learn that song? I never taught it to you." "I heard it on the radio," Sarah said. "I just tried to find the right keys." Mrs. Rodriguez sat down heavily in a chair near the piano. "Sarah, do you understand what you just did? You played a song by ear. That means you heard music and figured out how to play it without reading notes or having someone teach you." Sarah wasn't sure why Mrs. Rodriguez looked so surprised. "Is that good?" "It's very rare," Mrs. Rodriguez said. "Most people can't do that, even after years of lessons." "You have a special gift," Sarah felt confused. "But it seemed easy. I just listened to the sounds in my head and found them on the piano." "That's exactly what makes it special," Mrs. Rodriguez said. "Not everyone can hear music in their head like that. Not everyone can translate what they hear into their fingers on the keys." From that day on, Mrs. Rodriguez started teaching Sarah different things. Instead of just simple songs, she showed Sarah how chords work together. She taught her about rhythm and timing, She explained how music had patterns like math or language. Sarah absorbed everything like a sponge absorbs water. Every new thing Mrs. Rodriguez taught her made sense immediately. Sarah could see how pieces of music fit together like pieces of a puzzle. After 3 weeks at the piano, Sarah could play songs she had never heard before just by looking at simple sheet music. After 1 month, she was creating her own melodies. She would sit at the piano and let her fingers move across the keys, making up music as she went. Other people at the community center started to notice. When Sarah played, conversations would stop. People would turn to listen. Children who came to the center for after-school programs would sit on the floor near the piano and ask Sarah to play songs they knew. "You're getting quite an audience," Mrs. Rodriguez said one day as a group of children listened to Sarah play. Sarah looked around at all the faces watching her. She felt nervous but also proud. "Do you think I'm really good at this?" Mrs. Rodriguez put her hand on Sarah's shoulder. "Sarah, in 30 years of teaching piano, I have never seen anyone learn as fast as you. You don't just play music. You understand it. It's like music is a language you already knew, and you just needed someone to show you the alphabet." That night, Sarah walked home thinking about Mrs. Rodriguez's words. She had always felt different from other kids her age. She wasn't interested in the same things they liked. She didn't care about fashion or celebrity gossip. She had always felt like she was looking for something, but she didn't know what. Now she knew. She had been looking for music, and music had been looking for her too. When Sarah got home, her parents were closing the laundromat for the night. Her father was counting the money from the cash register. Her mother was folding the last load of customer clothes. "You're home." "Late again," her mother said in Mandarin. "Where have you been?" Sarah hesitated. She hadn't told her parents about the piano lessons. She wasn't sure they would understand. "I was at the community center. I've been helping with some volunteer work." It wasn't exactly a lie. She was helping Mrs. Rodriguez with filing and organizing. But Sarah felt bad for not telling the whole truth. "Good," her father said. "Volunteer work looks good on college applications." Sarah nodded, but inside she felt sad. Her parents thought about everything in terms of practical benefits, college applications, job skills, making money. They had never talked about doing something just because it made you happy. That night, Sarah lay in bed listening to the sounds of the city outside her window. Cars driving by, people talking on the street, the hum of the refrigerator downstairs. But in her mind, she was hearing piano music. She was imagining new songs she wanted to try tomorrow. For the first time in her life, Sarah felt like she had found the thing she was meant to do. She just didn't know yet how complicated that discovery would make her life. 2 months had passed since Sarah first touched the piano. Every day after school, she went straight to the community center. She practiced for 2 or 3 hours, only stopping when Mrs. Rodriguez reminded her that it was time to go home. Sarah was no longer playing simple children's songs. Mrs. Rodriguez had given her books with more difficult music. Sarah could read the black dots on the white paper and turn them into beautiful sounds. She could play classical pieces by famous composers like Mozart and Bach, but more importantly, Sarah was creating her own music. She would sit at the piano and let her feelings flow through her fingers. When she was happy, the music was bright and dancing. When she was sad, the music was slow and deep. When she was excited, the music jumped around like it couldn't sit still. One evening, Mrs. Rodriguez stayed late to listen to Sarah play. Sarah had just finished playing a piece she had written herself. It told the story of a bird learning to fly. The music started low and uncertain, then grew stronger and more confident as the bird found its wings. "Sarah," Mrs. Rodriguez said quietly, "we need to talk." Sarah turned on the piano bench to face her teacher. Mrs. Rodriguez looked serious, which made Sarah nervous. "You've learned more in 2 months than most of my students learned in 2 years, Mrs. Rodriguez continued. "You have extraordinary talent. But this old piano and these simple books are not enough for you anymore. You need better training." Sarah felt confused. "Are you a good teacher?" "I'm a good teacher for beginners," Mrs. Rodriguez said. "But you're not a beginner anymore. You need someone who can teach you advanced technique. You need a proper piano that's in tune. You need to study with professional musicians. Mrs. Rodriguez walked over to her desk and picked up a colorful brochure. She handed it to Sarah. On the front was a picture of a beautiful building with tall windows and green lawns. At the top, in gold letters, it said, Whitmore Academy of Music. This is one of the best music schools in the state, Mrs. Rodriguez explained. They have an excellent program for young pianists. The teachers there are concert musicians. They have practice rooms with perfect grand pianos. They can give you the training you deserve. Sarah looked through the brochure. There were pictures of students her age playing in recital halls. There were photos of practice rooms with shiny black pianos. There were descriptions of classes about music theory, composition, and performance. It looked like a dream. But Sarah knew enough about the world to understand that dreams cost money. How much does it cost? She asked quietly. Mrs. Rodriguez sat down beside her. It's expensive. But they have scholarships for talented students who can't afford the full tuition. If you audition and they accept you, they might pay for most of your education. Sarah felt her heart start to beat faster. Really? They would do that? For someone with your talent, yes. But Sarah, the audition is very competitive. Students from all over the state try to get in. Most of them have been taking lessons since they were very young. They've had expensive teachers and years of training. Sarah looked at the brochure. Again, now the pictures seemed different. The students looked confident and polished. Their clothes were expensive. Their families probably had music rooms in their houses with beautiful pianos. Do you think I could compete with students like that? Sarah asked. I think you have more natural talent than any of them, Mrs. Rodriguez said. But talent isn't everything. You would need to work very hard to catch up on technique and theory. And Sarah, there's something else we need to discuss. Mrs. Rodriguez paused like she was choosing her words carefully. The application fee for the audition is $200. And if you're accepted, even with a scholarship, there would be costs for books, transportation, and other expenses. Have you talked to your parents about music school? Sarah felt like a cold weight had settled in her stomach. $200 was more money than her family spent on groceries in a month. She thought about her parents counting every dollar at the end of each day in the laundromat. She thought about the broken washing machine her father had been trying to fix for weeks because they couldn't afford to replace it. No, Sarah said quietly. I haven't told them about the piano lessons yet. Mrs. Rodriguez looked surprised. They don't know you've been coming here? Sarah shook her head. They think I've been doing volunteer work. I was afraid they would think music lessons were a waste of time. Sarah, you have to tell them. They need to know how talented you are. They need to understand what an opportunity this could be. That night, Sarah walked home very slowly. She carried the Whitmore Academy brochure in her backpack, but it felt as heavy as a stone. She thought about how to explain to her parents that she had been learning piano for 2 months without telling them. She thought about how to ask for $200 when she knew they were saving every penny. When Sarah got home, her parents were in the kitchen eating a late dinner. They looked tired, like they always did at the end of a long workday. Her father's hands were stained with grease from fixing machines. Her mother's feet hurt from standing all day. How was school today? Her mother asked in Mandarin. Fine, Sarah answered automatically. She sat down at the table with them but didn't feel hungry. Sarah, you seem worried about something, her father said. Is everything okay? Sarah looked at her parents' kind, tired faces. They had worked so hard their whole lives to give her opportunities they never had. They had left their families and their country so Sarah could have a better future. How could she tell them she wanted to pursue something as impractical as music? I'm fine, Sarah said, just thinking about homework. But she wasn't fine. For the rest of the evening, Sarah felt like she was carrying a secret that was too big for her to hold. She helped her parents clean up the kitchen and count the days' earnings. She did her regular homework. She got ready for bed. But all the time, She was thinking about the piano and the scholarship and the impossible distance between her dream and her reality. The next day at school, Sarah couldn't concentrate on her classes. Her math teacher asked her a question, but Sarah didn't hear it because she was thinking about chord progressions. In English class, she doodled musical notes in the margins of her notebook instead of taking notes about the lesson. After school, Sarah went to the community center as usual. But when she sat at the piano, the music didn't come as easily as it normally did. Her fingers felt heavy on the keys. She kept making mistakes in pieces she knew perfectly. "You're distracted today," Mrs. Rodriguez observed. "Are you thinking about what we discussed yesterday?" Sarah nodded. "I don't know how to tell my parents. They've worked so hard just to keep our family afloat. How can I ask them to spend money on something like music?" Mrs. Rodriguez sat down in the chair next to the piano. "Sarah, your parents love you. They want you to be happy and successful. But they can't support your dreams if they don't know what those dreams are." "But what if they say no?" Sarah asked. "What if they think it's foolish?" "Then at least you'll know where you stand," Mrs. Rodriguez said gently. "Right now, you're making decisions based on what you think they might say. That's not fair to them or to you." Sarah played a few notes absently on the piano. "What if I'm not good enough anyway? What if I audition and they reject me? Then my parents will have worried about money for nothing. What if you are good enough?" Mrs. Rodriguez countered. "What if you don't audition and you spend the rest of your life wondering what might have been?" That evening, Sarah made a decision. She would tell her parents about the piano. She would show them the brochure. She would explain about the scholarship opportunity. And then she would accept whatever they decided, but first, she needed to find the right words. She needed to help them understand that this wasn't just a hobby or a phase. This was something that felt as necessary to her as breathing. Sarah spent the evening thinking about what she would say. She practiced the conversation in her head, trying to imagine her parents' questions and concerns. She thought about how to explain that music wasn't just something she enjoyed, it was something she needed to do. When her parents came upstairs after closing the laundromat, Sarah was waiting for them in the living room. She had the Whitmore Academy brochure on the coffee table in front of her. "Mom, Dad," she said in Mandarin, "I need to tell you something important." Her parents sat down on the old couch across from her. They looked worried. Sarah realized that they probably thought she was in trouble or sick. "I haven't been completely honest with you about where I go after school," Sarah began. Her heart was beating so fast she could hear it in her ears. Her father frowned. "Where have you been going?" "To the community center." "But not just for volunteer work. I've been learning to play piano." The room became very quiet. Sarah could hear the refrigerator humming in the kitchen. She could hear cars passing on the street outside. But her parents didn't say anything. "For how long?" her mother asked finally. 2 months, Sarah admitted. "Every day after school." Her father's frown deepened. "Why didn't you tell us?" Sarah felt tears starting to form in her eyes. "Because I was afraid you would think it was a waste of time. Because I know we don't have money for music lessons. Because I thought you would make me stop." Her mother and father exchanged a look that Sarah couldn't read. "Show us," her father said quietly. For 3 days after the visit to the community center, Sarah's parents said nothing about music school. They went about their daily routine as if the conversation had never happened. Sarah helped in the laundromat after school as usual, but the atmosphere felt different. She could sense her parents watching her, thinking about things they didn't say out loud. Sarah continued going to the community center, but she couldn't concentrate on playing. Every time she sat at the piano, she thought about the audition deadline. Getting closer? 6 weeks had become 5 weeks, then 4.5 weeks. Mrs. Rodriguez didn't pressure her to talk about it. But Sarah could see the concern in her teacher's eyes. On Thursday afternoon, while Sarah was folding clean towels in the laundromat, an elderly woman came in carrying a small bag of delicate clothes. Sarah had seen her before. She came in every 2 weeks with the same careful request: hand-washing only for her silk, blouses and cashmere sweaters. The woman was tall and thin, with white hair pulled back in a neat bun. She always dressed elegantly, even for trips to the laundromat. Today she wore a dark blue coat and pearl earrings. She spoke with a slight accent that Sarah couldn't identify. "Good afternoon," the woman said to Sarah's mother. "I have some items that need special care." Sarah's mother smiled and nodded. She had learned enough English over the years to handle most customer requests. "Yes, Mrs. Hartwell. Hand wash only. We take good care." While her mother examined the delicate clothes, Sarah continued folding towels nearby. She was humming quietly without realizing it, a melody from a piece she had been practicing at the community center. Mrs. Hartwell turned toward the sound. "That's Debussy," she said, surprised. "Claire de Lune, are you a musician, dear?" Sarah stopped humming immediately. Her face turned red. "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize I was making noise." "Don't apologize," Mrs. Hartwell said kindly. "You have the melody exactly right. Do you play piano?" Sarah glanced at her mother, who was listening but pretending to focus on the clothes. "A little," Sarah said quietly. Mrs. Hartwell studied Sarah's face with intelligent blue eyes. "How long have you been playing?" "About 3 months," Sarah admitted. "And you already know Debussy? That's quite impressive for someone so new to the piano." Sarah didn't know what to say. She went back to folding towels, hoping the conversation would end, but Mrs. Hartwell didn't seem ready to leave. "I taught piano for many years," Mrs. Hartwell said. "At the university level? I can always tell when someone has real musical understanding, not just technical ability. The way you were humming that melody, you felt the music, not just the notes?" Sarah looked up, interested despite her shyness. "You were a piano teacher for 35 years? I taught at the conservatory downtown before I retired. I've heard thousands of students play, but true musical sensitivity is rare." Mrs. Hartwell paused. "Where are you studying?" Sarah felt trapped. She didn't want to lie, but she also didn't want to explain her complicated situation to a stranger. "At the community center," she said finally. Mrs. Hartwell looked puzzled. "The community center? Do they have a music program there?" "They have an old piano," Sarah said. "Mrs. Rodriguez has been teaching me." "Rodriguez?" Mrs. Hartwell repeated thoughtfully. "Carmen Rodriguez? Short woman with gray hair?" Sarah nodded, surprised. "You know her?" "We went to music school together many years ago." Carmen was a gifted pianist before she became a teacher. She has excellent musical judgment. Mrs. Hartwell looked at Sarah with new interest. "If Carmen Rodriguez is teaching you, and if you're already playing Debussy after 3 months, you must be quite talented indeed." Sarah's mother finished examining the clothes and wrote out a receipt. "Ready Tuesday," she told Mrs. Hartwell. "Thank you," Mrs. Hartwell said. But instead of leaving, she turned back to Sarah. "Would you mind if I asked you something personal?" Sarah nodded nervously. "Are you planning to pursue music seriously? Do you have plans for advanced training?" The question hit Sarah like a physical blow. All her worries about the audition and the money and her parents' silence came rushing back. "I don't know," she said quietly. "It's complicated." Mrs. Hartwell seemed to understand that there was more to the story. "I see. Well, if you ever want to talk about music or need advice, I live just 2 blocks from here, the White House with the blue shutters on Maple Street. I'm always happy to talk with young musicians." After Mrs. Hartwell left, Sarah's mother looked at her curiously. "She seemed very interested in your music," she said in Mandarin. "She used to be a piano teacher," Sarah explained. "A good one?" She taught at the university. Sarah's mother nodded thoughtfully but didn't say anything else. That evening at dinner, Sarah's father finally brought up the subject they had all been avoiding. "Your mother and I have been talking about the music school," he said without looking up from his rice bowl. Sarah's heart started beating faster. "What did you decide?" "We're still thinking," her mother said, "but we want to ask you some questions first." Sarah put down her chopsticks and waited. "If you don't get into this school, what will you do?" her father asked. "Will you be satisfied with playing piano as a hobby?" It was a hard question. Sarah thought about it honestly before answering. "I don't think I can stop playing now," she said. Music feels like something I need to do, not just something I want to do. But you could study other things in college, her mother said. Things that lead to stable jobs. You could play piano in your free time, maybe, Sarah said. But I think I would always wonder what might have happened if I had tried to become a real musician. Her parents exchanged a look. Sarah could see them communicating without words, the way married couples do after many years together. The money is a problem, her father said directly. Even if you get a scholarship, there will be other costs. And if you don't get a scholarship, we cannot afford the tuition. I understand, Sarah said. But, her mother added, we don't want to be the reason you give up on something you care about this much. If there's a real chance for you to succeed, we want to support you. Sarah felt tears starting in her eyes. Really? We're still worried about the practical things, her father said. But we've never seen you as passionate about anything as you are about music. That has to mean something. So, you'll let me audition? We haven't decided yet, her mother said. We want to understand more about your chances. We want to talk to Mrs. Rodriguez again. And we want to think about it for a few more days. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no either. Sarah felt hope and anxiety mixing together in her chest. The next day, Sarah went to the community center with her parents' words echoing in her mind. She told Mrs. Rodriguez about the conversation, and her teacher seemed encouraged. They're being smart, Mrs. Rodriguez said. This is a big decision for any family. The fact that they're considering it seriously shows how much they love you. Sarah was practicing scales when she heard a familiar voice behind her. That sounds much better than the humming in the laundromat. Sarah turned around to see Mrs. Hartwell standing in the doorway of the community center. She was wearing a cream-colored dress and a string of pearls, looking completely out of place in the plain room with its folding chairs and worn linoleum floor. Mrs. Hartwell, what are you doing here? I came to see Carmen, Mrs. Hartwell said. I called her last night after our conversation yesterday. I was curious about this young musician I had heard about. Mrs. Rodriguez appeared from her office with a huge smile on her face. Eleanor Hartwell, I can't believe you're here. It's been, 15 years? The two women hugged like old friends. Sarah watched, feeling confused about how this elegant stranger had suddenly appeared in her world. I had to come see this student you told me about, Mrs. Hartwell said. You described her talent in such glowing terms I couldn't resist. Sarah, meet Dr. Eleanor Hartwell, Mrs. Rodriguez said formally. She was one of the most respected piano teachers in the state before she retired. She taught at the conservatory for over 30 years. Sarah felt suddenly self-conscious. Nice to meet you properly, she said. The pleasure is mine, Dr. Hartwell sighed. Carmen tells me you're considering auditioning for Whitmore Academy. Maybe, Sarah said cautiously. My parents are still deciding. Dr. Hartwell walked over to the old piano and examined it critically. This instrument has seen better days, she observed. But Carmen says you've made remarkable progress despite its limitations. Sarah, would you play something for Dr. Hartwell? Mrs. Rodriguez asked. Show her what you've been working on. Sarah felt nervous. Playing for Mrs. Rodriguez was comfortable now, but Dr. Hartwell was a real professor. She had taught students who became professional musicians. What if Sarah's playing wasn't as good as Mrs. Rodriguez thought? What would you like to hear? Sarah asked. Whatever you feel like playing, Dr. Hartwell said. I'm interested in your musical instincts, not just your technique. Sarah sat at the piano and closed her eyes for a moment. She decided to play the piece she had written about. The Bird Learning to Fly. It was her own music, so even if her technique wasn't perfect, at least the emotions would be genuine. As she played, Sarah forgot about being nervous. The music told its story through her fingers, the uncertainty of the young bird, the first tentative attempts at flight, the growing confidence, and finally the joy of soaring free. 3 weeks of intensive practice had transformed Sarah's playing. Every day after school, she walked to Dr. Hartwell's elegant house on Maple Street. The White House with blue shutters looked exactly as it had for years, but now it felt like A second home to Sarah. Inside, Dr. Hartwell's music room was like something from a dream. The grand piano was a gleaming black Steinway that reflected the light from tall windows. The walls were lined with books about music and framed photographs of Dr. Hartwell with famous musicians from decades past. The room smelled faintly of lemon polish and old paper. The first time Sarah had touched the keys of the grand piano, she had nearly cried. The sound was rich and pure, nothing like the tinny notes of the community center's old upright. Every key worked perfectly. The touch was responsive and expressive. It was like speaking in a beautiful language instead of trying to communicate through broken words. Dr. Hartwell was a patient but demanding teacher. She worked with Sarah on technique, teaching her how to shape phrases and control dynamics. She explained the history behind each piece Sarah would play for the audition. She helped Sarah understand not just how to play the notes, but how to make them into music that would move the listeners. Remember, Dr. Hartwell said during one of their sessions, the judges at Whitmore have heard thousands of students play these same pieces. Technical accuracy is expected. What they're looking for is something more: musical personality, emotional connection, the ability to make familiar music sound fresh and meaningful. Sarah had chosen her 3 audition pieces carefully with Dr. Hartwell's guidance. The first was a Bach invention in F major, which would demonstrate her understanding of classical structure and her technical precision. The second was Chopin's Minute Waltz, which would show her ability to handle romantic expression and rapid passages. The third was a contemporary piece by an American composer, which would prove she could adapt to different musical styles, but Sarah had also prepared something extra. The piece she had written about the bird learning to fly. Dr. Hartwell had suggested she polish it in case the judges asked to hear something original. Many students can play the required pieces well, Dr. Hartwell explained, but not many can compose their own music. If you get the chance to play your composition, it could set you apart from other applicants. 3 days before the audition, Sarah's parents finally made their decision about the application fee. Sarah's father had worked extra hours fixing machines for other laundromats in the neighborhood. Her mother had taken on additional hemming work for customers. Together, they had saved enough money for the $200 application fee. "We believe in you," her mother said when she handed Sarah the envelope with the money. "We've seen how hard you've worked. We've heard how beautifully you play. If this is your dream, then it's worth the risk." Sarah had cried when her parents told her this. She understood what the money represented: weeks of extra work, sacrifices her parents had made without complaining. The weight of their faith in her felt both inspiring and terrifying. On the morning of the audition, Sarah woke up before her alarm clock. Her stomach felt like it was full of butterflies doing somersaults. She had been dreaming about playing piano, but in the dream, every time she pressed a key, no sound came out. Sarah got dressed carefully in the outfit Dr. Hartwell had helped her choose. It was a simple black dress that her mother had bought at a discount store and tailored to fit perfectly. With it, Sarah wore her grandmother's pearl necklace, the only piece of jewelry her family owned that looked elegant enough for such an important occasion. Dr. Hartwell had offered to drive Sarah to the audition, and Sarah's parents had gratefully accepted. They trusted this refined woman who had been so generous with their daughter. When Dr. Hartwell arrived in her silver sedan, Sarah's parents thanked her repeatedly in their mixture of English and Mandarin. "Take care of our daughter," Sarah's mother said, adjusting Sarah's necklace one final time. "I will," Dr. Hartwell promised, "and don't worry. Sarah is well prepared. She has every reason to be confident." The drive to Whitmore Academy took 40 minutes through morning traffic. Sarah sat in the passenger seat, running through her pieces mentally. Her fingers moved silently against her legs, practicing the difficult passages from the Chopin Waltz. "Nervous?" Dr. Hartwell asked, glancing over at Sarah's moving hands. "Terrified," Sarah admitted. "Good, that means you care. But remember, you've worked harder in the past 3 weeks than most students. Work in 3 months. You're ready for this." As they drove through an area of the city Sarah had never seen before, the houses became larger and more elaborate. The lawns were perfectly maintained. The cars in the driveways were new and expensive. Sarah began to understand that most of the students she would be competing against came from this world of privilege. Whitmore Academy was even more impressive in person than in the brochure. The building was made of red brick with ivy growing up the walls. Wide steps led to heavy wooden doors. Students and parents were walking up the steps, all dressed formally. The girls wore designer dresses and carried expensive handbags. The boys wore suits that looked like they had been tailored specifically for them. Sarah felt suddenly self-conscious about her simple black dress and her mother's careful alterations, but Dr. Hartwell seemed to read her thoughts. "Sarah, remember? That music is not about what you wear or where you come from. It's about what you can do with your hands and your heart. Once you sit at that piano, nothing else matters." They entered the building and found the registration table. A cheerful woman with a clipboard checked Sarah's name off a list and handed her a number 23. There were 47 students auditioning that day for 12 available scholarships. The waiting area was a large room with comfortable chairs and high ceilings. Students sat with their parents, some reviewing sheet music, others practicing fingering exercises in the air. The sound of nervous conversation filled the room in multiple languages. Sarah found a seat and tried to calm her racing heart. She looked around at the other students and felt overwhelmed by how polished and confident they appeared. Many of them seemed to know each other, suggesting they had been playing in the same musical circles for years. A girl sitting near Sarah was warming up her fingers on an invisible keyboard. She looked about Sarah's age but carried herself with the poise of someone much older. Her dress was clearly expensive, and she wore a watch that probably cost more than Sarah's family made in a month. "How long have you been playing?" the girl asked Sarah in a friendly voice. "About 4 months, Sarah answered. Honestly, the girl looked shocked. 4 months? But this is an advanced audition. Most of us have been playing for 10 years or more." Sarah felt her confidence collapse. 4 months suddenly seemed like nothing. How could she compete with students who had been playing since they were small children? "What pieces are you playing?" another student asked, joining the conversation. "Bach Invention in F major, Chopin's Minute Waltz, and a piece by John Adams," Sarah said. "Oh, the Minute Waltz," the first girl said. "That's a challenging choice. I played that in competition 2 years ago. It took me months to get the tempo right." Sarah tried to smile politely, but inside she was panicking. These students talked about difficult pieces like they were everyday exercises. They mentioned competitions and performances that Sarah had never even heard of. Dr. Hartwell, who had been talking to some other parents, returned to sit beside Sarah. She must have noticed Sarah's pale face because she leaned over and spoke quietly. "Don't listen to their chatter. Half of what they're saying is just nerves talking. Focus on your own preparation." But Sarah was finding it hard to focus on anything except the growing certainty that she was completely out of her league. When a student near her began discussing the summer she had spent at a music camp in Austria, Sarah felt like she might be sick. The auditions were taking place in several different rooms. Every 15 minutes, a new group of numbers was called. Sarah watched students disappear down hallways, some returning looking relieved, others looking disappointed. "Numbers 20 through 25, an official voice called out. Sarah's heart jumped. Her number was 23. This was it. Dr. Hartwell squeezed her hand. "Remember everything we practiced. Play with confidence. You belong here." Sarah walked with the other students down a long hallway lined with portraits of famous musicians. Their footsteps echoed on the polished wooden floor. Sarah's hands felt cold and slightly damp. They were led to a waiting area outside the audition rooms. Students would be called in one at a time. Sarah would be third in her group. She sat on a wooden bench and tried to practice deep breathing like Dr. Hartwell had taught her. But her mind kept racing with worried thoughts. What if she forgot the beginning of the Bach piece? What if her hands shook so much she couldn't play the fast sections of the Chopin? What if the judges could tell immediately that she didn't belong? There, the first student was called in. Sarah could hear faint sounds of piano music through the closed door, but she couldn't make out what was being played. After about 10 minutes, the student emerged looking flushed but satisfied. The second student went in, more muffled piano sounds. More waiting. Then Sarah heard her number called. She stood up on legs that felt unsteady. 2 weeks felt like 2 months. Every morning, Sarah woke up thinking about the audition results. Every afternoon, she rushed home from school to check if any mail had arrived from Whitmore Academy. Every evening, she wondered if tomorrow would be the day that changed her life forever. Dr. Hartwell had warned her that the waiting would be difficult. The hardest part of any audition is what comes after, she had said. You've done everything you can do. Now you have to trust the process and try to stay patient. But patience was not easy when Sarah's entire future seemed to hang in the balance. She continued going to Dr. Hartwell's house every day after school, but practicing felt different now. Sometimes Sarah played with desperate intensity, as if perfect performance could somehow influence a decision that had already been made. Other times, she felt too nervous to concentrate and made mistakes in pieces she had played flawlessly for weeks. "You're putting too much pressure on yourself," Dr. Hartwell observed during one particularly frustrating practice session. Sarah had just stumbled through the Chopin waltz, making errors she hadn't made in weeks. "I can't help it," Sarah said, her hands trembling slightly as they rested on the keys. "What if I don't get in? What if all this work was for nothing?" Dr. Hartwell sat down beside Sarah on the piano bench. "Listen to me carefully. Nothing you have learned, nothing you have experienced, nothing you have accomplished in these past months has been for nothing. You are a different person than you were 4 months ago. You are a musician now. That doesn't depend on what any school decides." Sarah wanted to believe her, but the fear was overwhelming. She had allowed herself to dream of studying at Whitmore Academy, of learning from world-class teachers, of being surrounded by other serious musicians. The possibility of rejection felt like it would crush everything she had discovered about herself. At home, her parents tried to keep things normal, but Sarah could see the tension in their faces too. They had invested their savings and their hopes in her audition. Her father worked longer hours, as if staying busy would make the time pass faster. Her mother kept finding small tasks for Sarah to do in the laundromat, probably for the same reason. One evening, while Sarah was folding towels, her mother sat down beside her. "Are you sorry we let you try this?" her mother asked quietly in Mandarin. Sarah looked up, surprised. "Sorry? Why would I be sorry?" "Because now you have to live with uncertainty. Before, you didn't know what you were missing." Sometimes ignorance is easier than hope. Sarah thought about this. "No," she said finally, "I'm not sorry. Even if I don't get into music school, I'm glad I know I can play piano. I'm glad I know what it feels like to make music." Her mother smiled and patted Sarah's hand. "That's a wise answer." On the 13th day of waiting, Sarah came home from school to find her father standing by the mailbox with an unusual expression on his face. He was holding a thick white envelope with the Whitmore Academy logo in the corner. "It came," he said simply. Sarah's heart stopped. The envelope was thick, which might be good news. Acceptance letters usually included more paperwork than rejection letters, but it might also just mean they were sending detailed explanations to everyone. "Do you want to open it now, or wait for your mother?" her father asked. Sarah looked at the envelope in his hands. 4 months of work, weeks of preparation, her family's savings. All her hopes and fears, everything came down to what was written on the papers inside. "Let's wait for Mom," she said, though waiting another hour seemed impossible. Her mother rushed upstairs from the laundromat the moment her father called. The three of them sat around their small kitchen table, the envelope placed in the center like it contained explosives. "You open it," Sarah said to her mother. "I'm too nervous." Her mother's hands shook slightly as she carefully opened the envelope. She pulled out several sheets of paper and unfolded the top one. Sarah watched her mother's face for any sign of what the letter contained. Her mother's eyes scanned the first few lines. Then her face broke into the biggest smile Sarah had ever seen. "You got in?" she whispered. "You got the scholarship." Sarah felt like the world had stopped spinning. What? Her father reached for the letter and read aloud in English. Dear Miss Chen, we are pleased to inform you that you have been accepted into the Whitmore Academy piano program with a full merit scholarship. Sarah started crying before he could finish reading. 4 months ago, she had never touched a piano. Now she was going to study at one of the best music schools in the state. It didn't seem possible. Her parents were crying too. They hugged Sarah and each other, all talking at once in a mixture of English and Mandarin. Sarah's mother kept saying, I can't believe it, I can't believe it. And her father kept shaking his head in amazement. When they finally calmed down enough to read the entire letter, they learned the details. Sarah's scholarship would cover tuition, books, and even some living expenses. She would start in the fall semester, just 4 months away. The letter also mentioned that her audition had been exceptionally impressive, and that the faculty was excited to work with such a promising young musician. There's more, her father said, pulling out another sheet of paper. This is from Dr. Morrison personally. He read, Dear Sarah, your audition was one of the most memorable we have heard in years. Your composition in particular demonstrated a level of musical creativity that is rare at any age. We believe you have the potential to become not just a skilled performer, but an important musical voice. We look forward to nurturing your talent in our program. Sarah felt overwhelmed by gratitude and disbelief. Dr. Morrison, who had heard thousands of auditions, thought her music was special. The judges, who had seemed so intimidating, had actually been impressed by her playing. We have to call Dr. Hartwell, Sarah said suddenly. She needs to know. They drove to Dr. Hartwell's house immediately. When she opened the door and saw their faces, she knew the news before they said a word. You got in? She exclaimed, pulling Sarah into a tight hug. I got the full scholarship, Sarah said, still hardly believing it herself. Dr. Hartwell's eyes filled with tears. I knew it. I knew they would recognize your talent. This is wonderful, Sarah. You've earned this completely. They sat in Dr. Hartwell's elegant living room while Sarah read the acceptance letter aloud. Dr. Hartwell listened with the pride of someone who had played a crucial role in making the dream possible. What happens now? Sarah's mother asked. Dr. Hartwell explained the next steps. Sarah would need to choose her classes for the fall semester. She would be assigned a primary piano teacher and would also take courses in music theory, composition, and music history. She would participate in master classes with visiting artists and perform in student recitals. It will be challenging, Dr. Hartwell warned. You'll be studying with students who have been playing much longer than you. But you have something. Many of them don't have natural musical instinct and a genuine love of music. That will carry you further than technique alone. That evening, Sarah called Mrs. Rodriguez to share the news. Her first teacher was even more excited than Dr. Hartwell had been. I can't believe it, Mrs. Rodriguez said over the phone. When I first saw you at that old piano, I knew you had something special. But this this is incredible. I could never have done it without you, Sarah said. You're the one who started everything. No, Sarah, you started everything the moment you decided to sit down at that piano bench. I just helped you discover what was already inside you. The next few days passed in a blur of excitement and phone calls. Sarah's extended family called from China to congratulate her. Customers at the laundromat heard the news and stopped by to offer their good wishes. The story spread through their small community. The girl from the laundromat who had won a scholarship to a prestigious music school, but perhaps the most meaningful response came from the other students at the community center. When Mrs. Rodriguez announced Sarah's acceptance at the next after-school program, the children cheered and applauded. Several of them asked if Sarah would teach them piano before she left for music school. You're famous now, one little girl said to Sarah. You're proof that dreams can come true. Sarah realized that her story had become bigger than just her own journey. She had become an example for other young people who might think their dreams were too big or too expensive or too unlikely. Her success proved that talent could emerge from unexpected places and that hard work could overcome many obstacles. 2. Weeks after receiving her acceptance letter, Sarah gave a farewell concert at the community center. Dr. Hartwell had suggested it as a way to thank the people who had supported her journey. The old piano had been tuned especially for the occasion, and folding chairs were arranged in neat rows facing the instrument. The audience was small but meaningful. Sarah's parents sat in the front row, beaming with pride. Mrs. Rodriguez sat beside them, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. Dr. Hartwell was there, of course, along with several neighbors from the community and children from the after-school program. Sarah played the same 3 pieces she had performed for her audition, the Batch Invention, the Chopin Waltz, and the contemporary piece, but she also played her original composition about the bird learning to fly, which had become everyone's favorite. As she played her own music. The summer before starting at Whitmore Academy passed quickly. Sarah spent most of her time practicing and preparing for the intensive program ahead. Dr. Hartwell had given her a list of pieces to learn over the summer, music that would prepare her for the advanced level of study she would encounter, but Sarah also spent time helping at the laundromat and teaching piano to some of the younger children at the community center. Mrs. Rodriguez had asked her to share her knowledge with others, and Sarah discovered that teaching helped her understand music even better. When you have to explain something to someone else, you have to understand it more deeply yourself, Dr. Hartwell told her. Teaching will make you a better musician. One of Sarah's students was 8-year-old Maria, whose family had recently moved to the neighborhood from El Salvador. Maria reminded Sarah of herself, shy, curious, and drawn to music despite having no formal training. Watching Maria's face light up when she played her first simple melody made Sarah remember why she had fallen in love with piano in the first place. Music is the same in every language, Maria said one day after learning to play Happy Birthday in both English and Spanish. Sarah realized that the little girl had understood something profound about the universal nature of music. As August approached, and her start date at Whitmore Academy grew closer, Sarah felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness that was becoming familiar. She was eager to learn from professional teachers and to be surrounded by other serious musicians. But she also worried about fitting in with students who had been playing much longer than she had. Dr. Hartwell seemed to sense her concerns. "Remember," she said during one of their last summer lessons, "you were accepted because of who you are as a musician, not in spite of it. They want students with fresh perspectives and natural talent. Don't try to be like everyone else. Be yourself." The week before school started, Sarah and her parents drove to the Whitmore Academy campus for orientation. The buildings looked even more impressive than they had on audition day. Students and families were walking around the grounds, many carrying instrument cases and looking comfortable in the elegant academic environment. Sarah checked into her dormitory room, which she would share with another piano student named Jennifer. Jennifer was from New York and had been playing piano since she was 4 years old. Her side of the room was already decorated with photos of famous pianists and certificates from competitions Sarah had never heard of. "So you're the girl who learned piano in 4 months and got a full scholarship?" Jennifer said when Sarah introduced herself. "Everyone's been talking about you." Sarah felt her face get warm. "People have been talking about me? Are you kidding? Your story is legendary around here. The faculty has been discussing your audition all summer. Dr. Morrison played a recording of your composition at a faculty meeting." Sarah didn't know whether to feel proud or embarrassed. She had hoped to blend in with the other students, but apparently her unusual background had already made her stand out. The first day of classes was overwhelming. Sarah's schedule included private piano lessons with Dr. Morrison, music theory, music history, and a composition class. She also had to participate in a weekly Masterclass where students performed for each other and received feedback from visiting artists. Her first theory class was especially challenging. The professor assumed that all students had a solid foundation in music theory, but Sarah had learned mostly by ear and intuition. Terms like Neapolitan sixth and German augmented sixth were completely foreign to her. After class, Sarah felt discouraged. Several students had answered complex questions easily while Sarah struggled to understand what was being asked. For the first time since her acceptance, she wondered if she really belonged at Whitmore Academy, but her first private lesson with Dr. Morrison restored her confidence. They worked on a Beethoven sonata that Dr. Morrison had assigned, and Sarah found that her musical instincts helped her understand the piece even when she couldn't analyze it theoretically. "Your ear is remarkable," Dr. Morrison told her. "You hear harmonic relationships intuitively that other students have to learn through years of analysis. We'll work on filling in the theoretical knowledge, but don't lose that natural musical intelligence." The weeks passed in a blur of practicing, studying, and adjustment. Sarah worked harder than she had ever worked in her life. She spent hours in practice rooms, memorizing new repertoire and strengthening her technique. She studied theory textbooks late into the night, trying to catch up on years of formal training. Her fellow students were kind but intimidating. Many of them had performed with youth orchestras and won prestigious competitions. They talked casually about summer programs at famous conservatories and masterclasses with world-renowned pianists. Sarah felt like she was learning not just about music, but about an entire culture she had never known existed. The most challenging part was the weekly Masterclass. Every Friday, 3 students performed for their peers and a visiting artist who offered public feedback. Sarah dreaded her turn, which was scheduled for the 6th week of the semester. When the day finally arrived, Sarah felt more nervous than she had for her audition. At least the audition judges had been strangers. Now she would be playing for classmates who had become friends, people whose opinions mattered to her personally. The visiting artist that week was David Chun, no relation to Sarah, a famous pianist who had performed with major orchestras around the world. He was known for his technical brilliance and his demanding standards. Sarah had listened to his recordings and felt intimidated by his reputation. Sarah was the second student to perform that day. She had chosen to play the first movement of Mozart's Piano Sonata K331, a piece Dr. Morrison had assigned to help her work on classical style and ornamentation. As she walked to the concert grand piano at the front of the classroom, Sarah tried to calm her racing heart. 20 of her fellow students sat in rows of chairs along with several faculty members. David Chen sat in the front row with a neutral expression that revealed nothing about his expectations. Sarah sat at the piano bench and adjusted its height. The room was completely silent. She placed her hands on the keys and took a deep breath. The opening theme of the Mozart sonata was deceptively simple, a beautiful melody that required perfect control and elegant phrasing. Sarah had practiced it hundreds of times, but now, in front of an audience of professional musicians, every note felt crucial. She began to play. The first few measures went well. Sarah's fingers found the familiar patterns and the melody emerged clearly. But as she moved into the development section, where Mozart took the simple theme and explored it through different keys and variations, Sarah began to feel something unusual happening. Instead of just playing the notes she had memorized, Sarah found herself hearing the music as if for the first time. She could sense the conversation between different voices in the counterpoint. She could feel the harmonic tension and release that made Mozart's music so compelling. Most importantly, she could feel the joy and playfulness that Mozart had built into every phrase without consciously deciding to do so. Sarah began to shape the music with more freedom than she had ever allowed herself before. She added subtle, dynamic shading that emphasized the musical structure. She used rubato slight changes in timing to make the phrases breathe naturally. She brought out inner voices that created dialogue between different sections of the piano. As Sarah played, she forgot about the audience. She forgot about her nervousness and her insecurity about belonging at Whitmore Academy. She was completely absorbed in the conversation she was having with Mozart across the centuries. Using the piano as their shared language, the development section led into the recapitulation, where the opening theme returned but with new meaning after its journey through different keys. Sarah played this section with a sense of homecoming, as if the melody had learned something important during its travels and was now sharing that wisdom. When she reached the final cadence, Sarah held the last chord longer than usual, letting the sound fade naturally into silence. Only then did she remember where she was, and look up at her audience. The room was completely silent. Not the polite silence that usually followed student performances, but a deeper silence that suggested something unexpected had just happened. Sarah looked at the faces around her and saw expressions of surprise, wonder, and something that looked like awe. David Chun was staring at her with an expression she couldn't read. Dr. Morrison looked stunned. Her fellow students sat motionless. In their chairs, the silence stretched on for what felt like minutes but was probably only seconds. Sarah began to worry that she had made some terrible mistake. Had she played wrong notes? Had her interpretation been completely inappropriate? Finally, David Chun spoke, but his voice was softer than Sarah expected. "Miss Chun," he said slowly, "how long did you say you have been studying piano?" "About 8 months," Sarah replied quietly. More silence. David Chun shook his head slightly, as if trying to process something he couldn't quite believe. "In 25 years of giving master classes," he said, "I have heard that Mozart sonata performed by hundreds of students. I've heard it played by professional pianists in concert halls around the world." 5 years had passed since Sarah's masterclass performance that stunned David Chun into silence. The shy girl who had discovered piano at a community center had grown into a confident young woman, about to graduate from Whitmore Academy with highest honors. During her time at the academy, Sarah had worked tirelessly to develop her technique, while preserving the natural musical voice that made her playing special. She studied with visiting artists from around the world, performed in master classes and recitals, and even won several competitions. But perhaps most importantly, she had never stopped composing her own music. Her senior recital was scheduled for a Friday evening in May. The Academy's concert hall was filled with faculty, students, and visitors who had come to hear the young pianist everyone was talking about. Sarah's parents sat in the front row, dressed in their finest clothes and beaming with pride. Dr. Hartwell was there too, along with Mrs. Rodriguez and several other people who had supported Sarah's journey from the beginning. The program Sarah had chosen told the story of her musical development. She opened with the same batch invention she had played for her audition 5 years earlier, but now her performance revealed years of study and refinement. The piece that had once challenged her technically now served as a foundation for elegant musical expression. Next came a Chopin ballad, a piece far more complex than the simple waltz she had learned as a beginner. Sarah's performance showed not just technical mastery, but deep understanding of romantic musical style. Her years of study had taught her about historical performance practice, but her natural musical instincts guided her interpretation. The third piece was a contemporary work by a living composer, demonstrating Sarah's ability to engage with modern musical language. But it was the final piece of the recital that everyone was most eager to hear. Sarah had spent her senior year composing a piano suite called Journey Home. The 5-movement work traced her path from discovering music to finding her voice as an artist. Each movement told part of her story through musical metaphor. As Sarah walked to the piano for the final time that evening, she thought about how far she had traveled since that afternoon when she first pressed a key on the old upright piano at the community center. She was no longer the uncertain teenager who had stumbled into music by accident. She was an artist with something important to say. The first movement of Journey Home was called First Touch. It began with a single note, the same note Sarah had played that first day at the community center. From that simple beginning, the music grew into complex harmonies and melodies, representing how a single moment of discovery can transform an entire life. The second movement, Learning to Fly, was an expanded version of the piece Sarah had written as a beginner about a bird discovering its wings. But now, with years of compositional study behind her, the music was richer and more sophisticated while retaining its emotional directness. The third movement, Voices of Home, incorporated melodies from different musical traditions. Chinese folk songs her grandmother had sung, American hymns she had heard in her neighborhood, classical themes that had shaped her training. The movement showed how an artist's voice emerges from the combination of all their influences. The fourth movement, Silence and Sound, was inspired by that moment of stunned silence after her masterclass performance with David Chun. The music explored the power of quiet moments, the spaces between notes that give music its meaning. The final movement, The Circle Completes, brought all the themes together in a celebration of how far Sarah had traveled while acknowledging that her journey was just beginning. The piece ended with the same single note that had begun the suite, but now it resonated with all the musical knowledge and emotional experience Sarah had gained. When Sarah played the final note and lifted her hands from the keys, the concert hall was completely silent. For a moment, Sarah felt a flash of panic had her music failed to connect with the audience. But then she looked at the faces around her and saw expressions of wonder and deep emotion. The silence stretched for several seconds before erupting into thunderous applause. The audience rose to their feet as one, clapping and cheering with genuine enthusiasm. Sarah saw tears in many eyes, including those of her teachers and fellow students. Dr. Morrison walked onto the stage and waited for the applause to quiet down. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, "we have just witnessed something extraordinary. In 5 years of study at Whitmore Academy, Sarah Chun has developed from a complete beginner into an artist of remarkable maturity and originality. But what makes her story even more special is that she has never lost the sense of wonder and discovery that first drew her to music." She turned to Sarah. "Sarah, your composition tonight demonstrated not just technical skill, but genuine artistic vision. You have shown us that music can transform lives, and that talent combined with dedication can overcome any obstacle." After the recital, Sarah was surrounded by well-wishers. Many people wanted to congratulate her on the performance, but some had more specific requests. A woman approached her with a business card. "I'm Maria Santos from the Cultural Arts Foundation," she said. "We've been following your career with great interest. We'd like to discuss commissioning a piece from you for our Young Artist Showcase next season." Another man introduced himself as a representative from a major record label. "We're always looking for fresh musical voices," he said. "Your compositions tonight showed exactly the kind of originality and emotional depth that resonates with audiences." Sarah felt overwhelmed by the attention, but also excited about the possibilities. These conversations represented opportunities she had never imagined when she first sat down at that old piano. But the most meaningful moment came when a small group of children approached her after most of the adults had left. They were students from the community center where Sarah had first learned to play, brought to the recital by Mrs. Rodriguez. "Miss Sarah," said a girl who looked about 8 years old, "I want to learn piano like you did. Can you teach me?" Sarah knelt down to the girl's level. "What's your name?" "Isabella. Mrs. Rodriguez says you started playing when you were older, like me. Is that true?" "It's true," Sarah said. "I was 16 when I first touched a piano. Before that, I thought music was something other people did, not something I could do." "But you became famous," another child said. "You're a real musician now," Sarah smiled. "I became a musician the moment I decided to try. Everything after that was just learning how to be a better musician." Mrs. Rodriguez joined the conversation. "Sarah, these children have been practicing on the same old piano where you started. It's still out of tune, and some of the keys still don't work properly." Sarah looked at her first teacher with sudden inspiration. What if we could fix that? Over the next few weeks, Sarah worked with the Cultural Arts Foundation and several other organizations to raise money for the community center. Her story, the girl who went from complete beginner to concert pianist in 5 years, had captured people's imagination. Donations poured in from individuals and businesses who wanted to support music education in underserved communities. By the end of the summer, the community center had not just one restored piano, but 3. The old upright that had started Sarah's journey was completely rebuilt and properly tuned. 2 additional pianos were donated, along with funding for a permanent music teacher and a scholarship program for promising young musicians. The day of the dedication ceremony, Sarah returned to the community center for the first time since her farewell concert 5 years earlier. The room looked the same, but everything was different. Children filled every corner, some practicing scales, others experimenting with simple melodies, all of them discovering the magic of making music. Sarah sat down at the restored upright piano, the same instrument that had changed her life. She played Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, the first song Mrs. Rodriguez had taught her. But now the simple melody carried the weight of everything she had learned and experienced. When she finished, a little boy raised his hand. "Miss, can you teach us that song?" "Of course," Sarah said. "But first, let me tell you something important. This piano has a special power. It can take sounds that you hear in your heart and make them real. All you have to do is be brave enough to try." As Sarah began teaching the children, she realized that her journey had come full circle. She had started as a curious teenager who wandered into the community center by accident. Now she was returning as an accomplished artist who could inspire the next generation of musicians. But more than that, she understood that her success belonged not just to her, but to everyone who had supported her along the way. Mrs. Rodriguez, who had seen potential in a shy teenager; Dr. Hartwell, who had opened her home and shared her expertise; her parents, who had sacrificed to support a dream they didn't fully understand; the teachers at Whitmore Academy who had challenged her to grow. Even David Chun, whose stunned silence had helped Sarah understand the power of her gift. Sarah's story had become larger than just one person's journey from beginner to professional musician. It had become proof that talent could emerge anywhere, that dedication could overcome seemingly impossible obstacles, and that music had the power to transform not just individual lives but entire communities.